This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
And I think that I understand they want to sell DNA kits and they don't want to scare away their customer base. By the same token, I don't think they're being truthful with their product.
Imagine spitting into a tube, sending off your DNA, and unknowingly turning your life upside down. For me and thousands of others, this is our reality. I'm your host, Alexis Auerselt. In July of 2021, I discovered that I am an NPE, someone who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. This podcast shares the journeys of people who were shocked by a DNA discovery, mostly through modern DNA testing. We're telling the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. This is DNA Surprises. Surprise! It's a bonus episode. In recognition of DNA Day on April 25th, we're dropping a special episode with author Leeanne R, who recently released her book, NPE A Story Guide for Unexpected DNA Discoveries. In this episode, we take a deeper dive into some of the things Leeanne wrote about, from why she wrote the book, to NPEs in the media, to how consumer DNA testing companies should be held accountable to their customers. If you haven't read her book, I've included links for where to purchase it in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Leeanne. Welcome to the podcast, Leeanne. So happy to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here, Alexis.
You wrote a book that came out last year in 2021, NPE, A Story Guide for Unexpected DNA Discoveries. And I know that this comes from a personal place. So can you just share a little bit about what led you to write this book?
When I made my discovery in September of 2017, being a freelance journalist, the first thing I tried to do was find support and research online to help me handle this, because I had never known anyone that was in this situation before or experienced this. And the more I researched, the more I kept coming up empty-handed. So I started continuing on with my weekly journaling and kind of ramped it up. It started taking lots of notes about not only my thoughts and feelings, but also kind of my frustrations about what I couldn't find or what couldn't obviously find help for. About 3 to 4 months into my discovery, I found a few articles online, and that kind of gave me some hope that there were other people out there that were like me going through this, as well as I sought out a licensed therapist for some counseling. And fortunately, she was experienced with other misattributed parental events within her patients. So she was able to understand very quickly what I was experiencing and all the different feelings of anger and sadness and frustration, and in a sense, some kind of a relief of understanding questions from my past that now all of a sudden made sense to me. And then I started joining different message boards, private message boards and groups for NPEs, and began talking mostly to those in private conversations about how to craft a letter to a new half sibling or a new parent, or even to the existing birth mother, to help people get through it in a non-confrontational way. So I started keeping notes on that. And then I realized that what I had accumulated had turned into kind of a memoir, so to speak. And I thought to myself, well, that's great, but, who am I? And isn't this subject really more about all of us together as opposed to just me and my experience? I have the greatest respect for those who have written memoirs and the work that they have done. But for me, I wanted it to be something more than just my story. I felt that I was becoming the repository for lots of NPE stories. And I wanted them to be told, and I also wanted them to be framed in a concept of hope and support, and that there were resources out there, because there are so many variables to be in NPE that those who are not never realize. So I started writing. I started writing my stories and their stories, and getting permissions from people who had published different charts, and finding out different people who were doing research. And then I was curious about, well, how did this whole NPE thing kind of start, or what made illegitimacy, if that term is even around anymore, how did that come into the history of, where we are today in 21st century North America? And these were the stories that I found, and then I started writing about. And then the book materialized from all of that.
Wow. You kind of touched on this, and I know you share your story in detail in the book. And so I encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about Leeanne's story to read her book to learn more about that. But one of the things that you just touched on was all of the different situations that can lead to NPEs. And I found that really interesting when I read it, because it's true. There are so many situations, and all of us kind of have different paths to how we make our discoveries and how we came to exist. Can you touch on kind of what some of those situations are that maybe people don't think about?
Sure. And the way that I started quantifying that was from an exchange that I had with another writer at a conference. And we were talking about, well, what are you currently working on? And at the time, I was working on this book, and I told her I was, working on a book about unexpected DNA discoveries. And in my case, when you find out that your dad is not your biological father. And she said to me in a very snarky way, well, I guess it's going to be a really short book. And I was offended, incensed, and angered, because I knew that was a very closed-minded type of generalized outlook, because the world and our families didn't know about all of these circumstances that could create an NPE. For instance, in my situation, my mother had a long-term affair with my biological father. In other circumstances, birth mothers can be victims of sexual assault and have kept that from their spouse and their family. They can be young women who were victims of incest and never disclosed to their child the circumstances of them being born. There are situations where a couple would decide or need to have a donor conception and believe that it was going to be the husband's gamete sperm that was going to be a part of the process. And it turns out that there was a donor fraud and another person's sperm was used. And that creates not only the trauma in the NPE, but also in the parents of the NPE as well. There is situations where a couple is infertile, but one will decide not to tell the other about it and will seek out donation privately. And there is no control over whether or not the information that is on an intake form is accurate or legitimate. And a deception will be on one of the parents. Then, of course, the NPE, the child finds out about it when they take a consumer DNA test. There are bunches and bunches of variables. There are families that have covered up incest, where the child thought that their mother was actually their grandmother, their aunt was actually their sister, and a brother was actually an uncle was actually a father. So there are all kinds of scenarios. The thing that unites all of us, whether it's because of donor conception, adoption, because of consensual or non-consensual sexual encounters, is that all of us as adults have taken a DNA test and found out that we were lied to, that we were deceived. And sometimes it was more than just our immediate biological parents. Sometimes it was an entire family knew that this child, who is now an adult, was adopted or was a donor-conceived baby, or there was an illicit relationship that was known about. And it is pervasive in every area of society. It happens in wealthy families, it happens in poor families, it happens in Black, brown, white families, it happens all over the world where DNA tests are sold and you can access the information.
Yeah, it really does not. These events do not discriminate by any means. You're right. Thank you for going into all of those different circumstances. So how many of us are there, roughly?
In the past few weeks, there has been new information that has been that was funded by the National Institutes of Health through the Baylor College of Medicine at Baylor University in their bioethics and policy department. And they put out 1 million emails through one of the DNA companies, one of the smaller DNA companies, to their members. And within 8 days, they had 30,000 responses. And they shut down the survey because they didn't need any more. For a critical review of the statistics of how you can extrapolate what an accurate number is, you actually only need about 1,000 responses.
Oh, wow.
But they had 30,000 to deal with. Once they culled through that of incomplete, surveys and, odds and ends like that, they were able to get it down to 23,000. And what they found out through this study was 5% of all people who took a consumer DNA test. Okay, now this doesn't include someone who tests for medical reasons or someone who goes and tests specifically at a lab for a paternity test. This is just through commercial DNA tests that they sell on TV, that get advertised on TV and social media and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So the number is 5%. Okay, so if you've got a group of 100 people, that means 5 out of every 100 people are going to be NPE.
Wow.
Yeah. And when you think about that, it just in right now, worldwide sales in North America of DNA kits, and I'm working on another story right now, and I just picked up these numbers as well. The top 2 DNA companies together reported that they had in their databases a combined number of 40 million people. Okay. Mm-hmm. So 5% of 40 million people is 2 million people.
That just seems so much higher than I would ever imagine, because to be honest, when you're going through this, you feel so alone. You feel like you don't know anyone else who's had this experience, but really there are so many of us.
There are. And what's interesting to me, and what I've been writing about right now, is that to me there is this coalescing of all of the smaller groups. In other words, you've got people who were donor conceived who never knew about that because they before DNA tests, consumer DNA tests. You've got people who were adopted who never knew they were adopted because of consumer DNA tests. You've got regular old, genealogy is the number 2 hobby in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got genealogists, whether they're professional or hobbyists, that are also having their customers, people who professionally do family histories and whatnot. They're asking their people to do these consumer DNS, and they're coming up with NPEs. And then you have the other folks, and in my group, where there was a consensual unknown relationship that created my NPE. But what's uniting all of us, all of these groups, is the fact that consumer DNA testing has become this popular, affordable, commercial thing out there for people to take advantage of.
Mm. Now, in your book, you cover a range of stories. You have people contribute their stories in the book. And it seems like the reactions vary widely from NPE to NPE. I mean, I think there's that initial shock that we all have, but then the reactions are different, or they seem very different in the book. Why do you think that is? Is it the circumstances leading to the NPE, or what causes people to react so differently from one another?
I think it all goes back to mom. I think it all goes back to the birth mom and what the circumstances and variables were surrounding her at the time that she became pregnant with this child. Because there was one specific story that I remember where the parents thought they were infertile, and they had gone to a fertility specialist, and they believed that there was a process that this doctor was going to do to help her become pregnant with her husband's sperm. And it turned out that it was actually donor fraud, and this doctor had used his own sperm. These parents, were honest when she was younger, saying, we needed some extra help, and mommy and daddy went to a doctor because we really wanted to have you, and then mommy got pregnant with you, and then we had you, and we were so happy and whatnot. So they didn't even know. I mean, that was the part of this donor fraud that was in there. There are others that are, it depends a lot on how the birth mother reacts as well. My birth mother was dead, so I had nothing but, anger and unanswered questions. Mm-hmm. For others who have a birth mother that's still alive, I maintain, and what I saw in the stories that people shared with me, is that however your past relationship had been with your mother pretty much was going to determine how she was going to, or how you and her were going to handle that NPE. If your mother had been nurturing and kind and supportive, raising you as a child, then she was going to, in most cases, respond with remorse and, sorrow, and apologize and hope to get beyond it. If the birth mother was a stinker, or an absentee birth mother, or an abusive birth mother, that wasn't going to change in her response to being told, hey, I just found out that dad's not my father. Mm-hmm. So again, there's a lot that we share, but there are so many intricacies and twists and turns to every story. That was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that people understood as well, that my book was not going to be comprehensive on every type of conceivable scenario, but that these were the ones that were most prevalent that I had come across and that people had shared with me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it really is. There are so many variables, from the way that somebody was born or conceived to how they discovered it. One of the things as I was reading that honestly kind of gave me goosebumps was this thought of the unthought known, this concept.
Yeah.
And if you could read a passage from there, and then kind of talk about what that means, because I think so many of us say, I kind of had this feeling, I kind of knew. Things were always a little off, but we didn't put our fingers on it, right? We didn't necessarily know that our fathers were not our biological fathers.
A significant number of NPEs will announce with a sense of the resigned satisfaction of decades-long quest, I always knew I was different, and ending with, now I know what it is. Bolus's book, The Shadow of the Object, Psychoanalysis of the Unthought Known, is a clinical and highly technical book used by professionals and educators in psychoanalysis. It examines the concept of the unthought known in treating patients. In the book's epilogue, Bolus concludes with this statement: "In thinking the unthought known, we ponder not simply the kernel of our true self, but elements of our forebears."
So this concept of the unthought known, is this something that you see with most of the NPEs that you've spoken to?
Yes, and it is, regardless of the circumstances and the variables, it's another thread that unites all of us. When I was doing research on it, when I was reviewing my notes, this was another common thread that I saw that I thought was important to address, because most of us kind of, also have the comment of, yeah, when I was a kid, everyone thought I was just crazy, or I thought I was crazy. And I started researching intuition, and that's how I came across Christopher Bolus's book, and then did some research on him. And the science of intuition, the study of it, has been a legitimate study for pushing into decades now. And I thought to myself, there's finally now validation both in the sciences and mental health professionals that there exists some type of a mental brain activity that is picking up other subtle gestures, phrases, sensing emotions that consciously we're not aware of. And that when it comes down to it, with finding out about an NPE, there are so many of us that say, now I know why she said this. I know why I was treated like that. Now I understand why I always felt left out. Now I understand why he didn't like me. Mm-hmm. So there is validity, and I think that there is another entire area that the National Institutes of Health could look into, because you've got this large group now who has been experiencing this, and I have yet to come across an NPE who has not said, I felt that something wasn't right. I felt that something wasn't wrong. Something was off here.
TaxAct knows small business owners can sometimes use a little help with their taxes. That's why TaxAct has Expert Assist, a team of live tax experts ready to answer any questions you may have. Think of them as your own personal sidekick. Not like one of those funny talking animal sidekicks, more like the super smart nerding out on tax code and business casual attire sidekick, but just as helpful and lovable. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
Right. It's like, even when they were completely surprised by the NPE itself, there was always something that didn't fit.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was definitely the case for me and so many of the people that I've been lucky enough to interview for the podcast. There's usually just something. And, I often would say hindsight is 20/20. But when I read this, I thought, no, I did know deep inside. Yeah, I just love that concept. So you have a ton of resources in this book for people that are unsure how to reach out and make those initial contacts and those kinds of things. And I think that's one of the first things that people, when they're on their NPE journey, are unsure of, is how to make contact. What are just a couple of pointers that you would have for somebody who is unsure what to do next? They found their family, they want to contact them, but they're afraid to.
Oh, the first thing you need to do is stop. Take your time, breathe, and try and allow yourself to sort through your feelings as well as your thoughts. It sounds easier than it is to do. I know that you want answers right away. You figure, I'm this many years old, I'm an adult, I want to know what's going on. And there is a sense of urgency, and that is understandable. I experienced the same sense of urgency. And I know personally, and I have seen other recommendations as well, that if you take your time during these first few months, not first few days, not first few weeks, but first few months, you will not regret having taken that time, because the further you get into your discovery, you will find that you sort of start adjusting to, okay, this is the new reality now. What am I going to do with it? I highly recommend that people, journal, that they write out their thoughts. And if it's not, writing out on a little app on your phone, or a piece of paper and a pencil, or, just a scrap little package of sticky notes, just to get out what you're feeling and what your thoughts are, and to kind of give yourself a sense of control back, that you can organize your thoughts and your feelings before you say anything or do anything. Because what we want most, what NPEs want most, are very, very basic, in that an accurate medical history. That's, we're talking a very fundamental, very important, piece of the puzzle here. Not only for yourself, but if you are an NPE with children, you've also been, putting down for years the wrong familial medical history for your children as well. So that's the most important thing. Secondly, it would be nice to have some pictures. It would be nice to have a conversation to kind of put things into perspective. And I think that the same fear and anxiety and anger and sadness that an NPE experiences is also perhaps not as great, but certainly can and often does exist for quote unquote new family members. Mm-hmm. And I encourage NPEs, and I stand with all of us, that being an NPE is unfair. And you didn't ask for it. You did nothing but be born. That's all you did. You were born and you lived. Mm-hmm. And I understand that your sense of urgency and your righteous need for the truth is good and it is pure. But humanity being what it is, others will be scared. Others will be angered by the news. And at the end of the day, the goal is to get the NPE what they need and what they should have. And if you approach it with some empathy, despite not being shown any yourself in your situation, you will be more successful than if you go in guns blazing, mm-hmm. as they say, or demanding of others when really they don't have to, show you any humanity or any kindness. There have been just so many stories that have broken my heart of NPEs that were in crisis and reached out to new family members and were in their desperation for understanding their situation, who they were, their identity, their medical history, were not as genteel or as empathetic as they could have been in understanding what the other side of the coin looks like. So I think it's very important, if you just find out, it's much easier to find things today online. Google NPE, non-paternity event, non-parent event, find groups, go on Amazon, put that in the search bar for books, and you're going to be able to find immediate support up there. And, it'll get to you in 2 days if you're a Prime member.
Right.
So you've got that. So that's got, you've got that going for you, because these things did not exist only, 4.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. These things didn't exist. So you've got that. You've got social media support groups that are out there where you can join, and you don't even have to say anything. You can just kind of sit back and read and have the comfort of knowing that you're not alone.
I just had someone reach out to me just last week asking about resources and support for people on the other side. Are you aware of anything out there, or do you have any advice for, maybe the wife of a husband who just had a DNA surprise, or, people that are on the receiving end of that information? Because you're right. I think oftentimes the biological fathers didn't know either, not always, but oftentimes. And so how do people process that?
That's a really good question. And, not to be self-serving, but I can refer people to chapter 13 in my book where I do address that to help people that are in that situation. But specifically to your point, and that's what's a really good question is, you are the wife of a man who's just found out, unbeknownst to him, that he had a child that he was unaware of. The ripple of an NPE goes out much, much further. It is not just about the NPE. It is about several families. It's about the NPE if he or she has their own family and what the dynamic with their spouse or partner and children. It's the maternal side. It's the birth certificate father's paternal side. It's the birth mother's side. So you've got a lot of people that are going to be impacted from this. In the situation where you have a birth father surprise, I would suggest that the wife of the birth father consider a couple of what I would call irrefutable facts before you get into the emotional side of it. And one irrefutable fact is that your husband clearly engaged in unprotected sex either before or during your marriage. Okay, that's irrefutable. That's a fact. Second fact is that unprotected sex resulted in a child. Now, oftentimes we'll hear of birth fathers' wives who talk about, he didn't know, he didn't do anything, why do we have to deal with this? Why do we have to accept this person? Well, no one's saying you have to accept anybody, but you have to accept the two basic facts that your husband had unprotected sex and it resulted in a child. So the two people that are responsible for that are the birth mother and the birth father. And that's where it all begins and ends. So hopefully this wife of the birth father will say, I love and support my husband, and this is clearly a part of his life he was unaware of, but now this is the situation. And what would I want to do? What would I want for my children if they were in this position? Well, I would certainly want them to have a medical history, and I would certainly want to give this adult child, this NPE, maybe some photos or some information that would help clarify how they came to be, at the very least. Whether there's going to be a relationship or a long-term friendship or whatnot is really all secondary. I think the media has done a really one-sided job of talking about reunion being this wonderful, amazing unicorn and rainbows proposition for everyone that's involved. And it is often not. I encourage them not to be guided by fear. I encourage them to be guided by a basic sense of what is moral to do for another human being. And then whatever may or may not come from it, certainly no one knows.
I think that's great advice. And, I will plug chapter 13 of your book because as I was reading the list, I mean, first of all, you definitely hit on points that I identified with, saying we hear the platitudes. You're still you, your dad's still your dad. And those were things that I knew right off the bat I did not like to hear. So you actually list specific questions and statements that people who are supporting someone through an NPE can use. So for anyone out there who's maybe feeling exasperated with the platitudes, or for anyone out there who just isn't sure how to support someone through this, I think those are some great guidelines. So thank you for putting those together because, people I think are often trying their best, but they just don't know what to say. They've never experienced it before. And so they are just trying their best, but it isn't always helpful.
Exactly. And you can never go wrong with the words, I'm so sorry to hear how this has impacted you.
Yes. One of the things that you touched on in the book is something that, I vaguely thought about, but never really considered that this was maybe a larger issue for people. So beyond the change in biological father, birth parent, beyond maybe even changes in ethnicity or cultural background, you actually talk about this desire sometimes that people have to change their names. Is that something that you've encountered a lot through your discussions with NPEs?
Yes, it is. And it usually comes up at the beginning of a discovery. When the NPE is still trying to find, or at least, and it did for me as well. And that's why I can relate to it. What it came up was, who am I? Am I associated with my name? What do I do about my name? Is it going to make me feel better to change my name? Should I change my name? Should I add it to my name? And I really encourage people to do what is right for them. And I don't think there is a one size fits all under this. But I've known several NPEs from who had, wide and variable situations and circumstances as to their NPE, whether they were losing an identity or they thought they were white and African American. It turned out they were white and Hispanic, or a Hispanic person found out that they were half African American. So there you go. Sometimes they wanted to change their name to reflect something in their new cultural and ethnic familial identity. And I think that that's, really important. Some people get tattoos. Some people find that, having that constant reminder of a symbol that is important to them is very meaningful. Sometimes people will create a piece of jewelry that they wear all the time. I know that I've been wearing for the past 4 years a Celtic cross to recognize all of the paternal women in my family. So I think it's really important. Some people have chosen to add a middle name or hyphenate their last name. And I think that if that soothes you and that is important to you, go for it. It is very easy. You don't need an attorney in most states to change your name if you're an adult. You have to give a reason to the court. There's a nominal fee that you pay to file the paperwork. And, the judge asks you, why do you want to do this? And you tell them, because this is what I found out and this is why I want to do it. And as long as you're changing your name for individual pure purposes and not because you want to be known as Elvis Presley, it'll be easy to legalize.
Yeah, and you do provide some resources in the book. So, but I just thought that was a really interesting concept. I have spoken to someone who had their name changed, and I did think about what it would be like for me to have had a different name and that kind of thing. I'm married now, and I did change my name. So the urge to change it isn't particularly strong, but I do think that it's such an interesting concept because our names are so tied to our identity. And I think that's just another piece that maybe a lot of people don't think about.
Names are very much tied to our identity. And it was kind of, when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, it's okay because my birth father's last name is the same initial as my married name of Hay. So I was like, see, I kind of got it, just got that H in there anyway. So it all worked out for me.
Another thing that you touch on in the book, and I will admit, I kind of had a reaction. Maybe it's because of where I still am in my journey, but you do talk quite a bit about forgiveness and forgiveness for our mothers specifically. And I just wanted to talk with you more about that. Why is forgiveness so important for NPEs?
Forgiveness is important for NPEs because it impacts an NPE's life. And I think that sometimes it can be very difficult for people to understand, as it was for me, and I'm in this group as well, that forgiveness is something that you do for yourself. It's not letting anybody off the hook for treating you badly. It's not about excusing bad behavior. It's not about trivializing your pain or any trauma that you've been through. Forgiving is an opportunity for me as an NPE to forgive my mother was an opportunity for me to release the anger and the hate and the negativity and the frustration that I would never be able to confront her with the truth. My mother died in 2002, okay? If I didn't forgive my mother, all I would be doing is carrying around all those negative emotions that would never be resolved in my lifetime because she was already dead. Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite quotes is from Oprah Winfrey. And she says, just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you have to sit down and eat macaroni and cheese with them. And her point being, in the humor is her humor is great wisdom. Her point is that forgiveness doesn't mean that there is no memory of what happened. It doesn't mean that you should be treated badly or should be abused. That's not what forgiveness is about. And if someone or some institution has told you it is, then I would just seek out other help and counsel.
What if an appliance emergency didn't have to be? If your appliances suddenly decided they were done, don't stress. Best Buy has you covered with a wide variety of major appliances from trusted brands, in stock and available now. So you don't have to worry about laundry piling up, refilling the fridge, or that big dinner party you're hosting. Because Best Buy has the knowledge and expertise to get you the right appliance for your home. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
That's a really good perspective. I think in some ways I wonder if I've used maybe just a different word for forgiveness, because I feel like I have released, a lot of it. But if that word forgiveness for me is it feels powerful. But I will say that Oprah is an icon and one of my heroes. So if she says I should forgive, then maybe I should.
Well, and again, this did not happen easily or quickly or lightly for me in my relationship with my mother who had passed. So, I understand firsthand how hard that is. I mean, I literally considered disinterring my mother's ashes and throwing them in a garbage heap. I was so angry. It was like, what can I do? Yeah. She had left me a set of china, and I thought about I could throw it off. My therapist is in a 5-story building, and I could get over to her building, pull up all this hundreds of pieces of china to the roof, and throw them all off. And at the end of the day, would that make me feel better? And I thought to myself, no, that wouldn't make me feel better. Maybe in the moment it would be like, oh, well, there you go. But then it would still be with me. And I'm glad that you brought this up, because I've had this conversation with a couple of other folks about, you're pushing NPEs to forgive their mothers, and you don't know what I've gone through, and you don't know about that. And that's exactly right. I don't know what you've gone through. I have no idea what you went through in your childhood and what you went through in your adulthood in your relationship with your mother. What I want you to focus in on is, I want you to not feel this burden and waste this energy on something that's not going to make your life better. I want you to be whole. I want you to be happy. I want you to have peace. I want you to drop the baggage. And if that means you never talk to her again, or you disown her, or you cut her out of your social media, or whatever that is, you have to make that choice. But I want you to know that there is real scientific proof here. The Mayo Clinic is not some fly-by-night organization. They have real scientific proof about how forgiveness physically impacts us. And I want that for NPEs. I want them to be healthy and free and happy from this burden that was placed upon them that they did not deserve, that they did nothing to but take a breath and live.
That's really powerful. Talking about ways that people can, make themselves whole and heal on their journey, you provide a plethora of resources for NPEs, Facebook groups, the healing retreats, which I'm really excited to attend, and other resources. You also provide some warning about maybe some groups that we should be wary of. Can you speak to, what people should really be looking for as far as vetting a resource? Because this is all new territory.
Sure. And that's a great question. And I appreciate you asking it, because one of the things that I have found is that wherever there is trauma, there are people who are trying to capitalize on it. We see it when hurricanes or dangerous storms happen and neighborhoods are flooded with contractors who are fly-by-night organizations who are going to take their insurance money and then never show up. Well, unfortunately, with NPEs as well, there are those who start out on a path of providing, free support and free help, and then that morphs into, hey, we have, this event that's going to be for NPEs. And it's not just let's get together at the local Chili's for, an iced tea and some nachos. It's let's all meet up on a $3,000 cruise. Now, certainly, if you want to spend $3,000 on a cruise, go have a great time, more power to you. But to sell an event that is wrapped under a guise of this will help you, to me, is disingenuous. I think anyone who has been traumatized by an NPE discovery needs to, as they would with any major trauma or change in their lives, take a moment or two and sit and do nothing with their finances. The exclusion being seeking professional, licensed, medical, or psychological therapy and care. I think that NPEs and people who go through the journey are often very vulnerable to wanting to feel better, that any kind word can be misconstrued as something that is sincere when it is possibly a sales pitch. So I would definitely check out, if you choose to go onto a retreat or any other type of event, that you check out the state licenses of anyone who is supposed to be a therapist or a mental health professional that is going to be a facilitator or a sponsor or a speaker during any type of an event. And it's very easy to do. Every state, provinces in Canada, I'm familiar with, also have this. You can check out the license of a provider very easily. You go onto the state licensing board or the province licensing board website, and you put in that person's name. And it will come right up and tell you that their license is current. And in mental health, to keep your license current, whether you are a licensed social worker, whether you are a social worker, whether you are a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a mental health therapist, you must take courses every year to maintain your license. And those courses are to update you on new practices, new procedures, and the continuation of improvement of healthcare and mental health care for your patients. So when you see someone who advertises themselves or talks about, they've been in the mental health profession for 30 years and my name is Dr. So-and-so, and when you search out their state license and find out that it, hasn't been renewed in, 7-8 years, that tells me that this is not someone whose credentials are current, whose knowledge is not up to snuff with what is going on right now with identity crisis and misattributed parentage clients.
That's such great advice. There are a lot of groups out there, and I think you're right. When you're kind of in that almost just complete reactive state, when you've discovered an NPE, you're just looking for anything. And I think your advice to kind of stop, take a breath, and do your research before contacting someone, before joining a group, before reaching out to newfound family is really sound. So thank you for explaining that.
Thank you for asking the question. It's important, and we're in a vulnerable position when you first find out this, and that vulnerable position and emotionally and mentally lasts a while. It's not, something that instantaneously goes away in a short period of time. And I think that people want to help themselves and do the right thing, but sometimes they're not perhaps thinking to look just a little bit deeper besides seeing some letters in front of or behind someone's name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that you talked about in your book, and I love this because I'm big on media literacy. That's kind of like one of my passions, is the existence of the NPE in the media kind of as a trope or plot device.
Ah, yes.
And I, to be honest, never really thought about it until I had an NPE myself. And then all of a sudden, these movies that weren't even obvious were actually all about an NPE. And I found myself getting kind of triggered watching certain films that I just did not anticipate that being the storyline about. And I'm not somebody that, considers myself to be easily triggered, but I've started to notice that. What is the history of the NPE trope in film? I mean, it just seems like it's everywhere.
Oh, it is everywhere because it makes for a human-centered drama. And it's interesting that it does cause drama. It causes, deep disturbing drama in all these storylines. And I think it's because it's so relatable. Why else would it be as prevalent? I don't know where it began. I'm sure we can go back. Well, I mean, if you look just at the story of Moses,
yeah,
it goes back that far, even further. And why was that such a popular movie? Why wasn't where was the concept of an NPE then? And NPEs are everywhere in our society, and I think that the entertainment world, whether it is in literature or in movies or in television, realizes that this can add drama, and there's more of us out there than they think there is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will say, for listeners, the movie The Photograph, starring Issa Rae, is an NPE story. So if you're just looking for a feel-good love story and you don't want to hear about NPEs, do not watch that, even though it was a good movie, but don't watch it. Another thing that you wrote about, again, there's just so much information in this book, is the consumer DNA testing companies and how you think that they haven't really accepted an appropriate amount of accountability for supporting NPEs or warning people about the possibility of an NPE before they take their tests. So what are some things that you think that these companies should be doing?
I'm so glad that you brought this up because I am on a mission to get them to add on and take on the corporate responsibility that I believe should be expected of organizations that are not only the size that they are, but are also capitalizing on the genetic information that we are providing to them. As an example, the two biggest DNA companies, as of last week, the last time I checked, currently in their glossaries, which are deep and extensive, none of them have a reference to the term non-paternity event, which is a legitimate genetic genealogy term. It's not something made up. It's not something that's come, has only been created the past few years, or it's something that's in the current lexicon. No, it's been around for years and years. They do not have in their glossaries the mental health term misattributed parentage. And it's only been within the past couple of years that there has been any kind of more than a couple of sentences of a warning. But to find that, you have to dig way down, tab after tab after tab, to find a cursory statement that will say, you might find unexpected information. And I think that that's disingenuous because, as we know, the DNA companies are on top of every single holiday to promote their kits. And most of them have health services now as well. I mean, there's not a week that goes by that I don't have at least 3 DNA companies ask me to buy another kit or another service that they're offering or to take their survey. And I read all of these emails very carefully. And none of these emails even gives you a whiff of the idea that you might find out some information that could be disturbing, that could be traumatic even. I understand that they are public companies and they're exist to make a profit for their stockholders. I've got all that. My question is, that I would love an answer to, is why don't you tell people that this is a possibility? Why don't you send out an email when you send out the email that says your kit has arrived? There's a perfect opportunity to circle back and say to them, do you still want to do this? This can happen.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it definitely did not factor in for me, and I didn't really see anything about it. I know that on their FAQ pages, they put information about the accuracy of their tests, which I'm sure stems from people like me going, is this real? Did this really happen? Is there any way it's a mistake? And they have a breakdown of if it's a parent-child match, it's very likely that there is no mistake, and they address those things. So, and like you said, with all of the information that they have, they've certainly got to be aware of this. And it's a conscious decision to not.
Well, they are aware of it. And then there's a video that's been up for several years on YouTube with one of their genetic genealogists kind of laughing her way through people who call up and tell us that, the DNA kit is wrong. And we tell them that people may be wrong and paperwork may be wrong, but DNA doesn't lie. And it's all some kind of a lighthearted, ha-ha, this can happen, but in her experience, 9 times out of 10, she's found it's all positive and all wonderful. And, this is nothing to be concerned about. Well, I've got 2 million people out there that would say otherwise.
Right. Yes. Thank you for touching on that. That wasn't really something I thought about either until I read the book. And I'm so with you on this crusade for them to share at least a warning, Personally, I would also love to see them share some resources for people, even if it's just gathering all of the resources that are already created, but to put some support behind that, because it really is a traumatizing event when you kind of go into it thinking you're just going to find out something you kind of already know and maybe confirm some fun information.
I agree. And in my opinion, there's no excuse for them not to even just put the terms in their glossaries. I mean, how basic is that?
Right.
That to me is they are culpable for their lack of accuracy by excluding those terms.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to share about NPEs or your book or anything like that with the listeners?
I hope that whoever reads my book or reads the free look inside that's offered on Amazon, or when talking about what is in the book, that people will know that I had not only my interests at heart, but the best interests of the entire NPE community at heart. And that I have been so touched and humbled by the kind emails and DMs and reviews that people have taken time to write to me. And as a writer, there is nothing more special to me than someone who takes the time to write something for me. So I want to thank them for that. And I want to assure the NP community that if there was anything that you felt was amiss, that, as I said, it was an honest omission or error or faux pas, not wanting to do any harm, but to embrace every NPE, regardless of their variables and their circumstances, to provide them with something that they could physically hold in their hand with this book and know that they were not alone.
Yes, that's great. Well, I always ask everyone 2 questions at the end, but I feel like this entire episode was about support and advice for NPEs. So I'll ask you one. What advice do you have for parents that are keeping an NPE from their children?
My advice is to be honest with your child and trust that your child will continue to love you. They might not like you. They might be unhappy with the truth. But when you have the truth in a relationship, there is the space to heal. When you have a lie in a relationship, it is often much too difficult to ever bridge that gap.
Well said. Well said. So remind everyone where they can get your book. Again, it's called NPE, A Story Guide for Unexpected DNA Discoveries, and it is by Leeanne R. Hay, who is with us today.
It is available on Amazon, and it is available on Amazon in Canada, in the UK, and in Australia, and overseas. It is also available on Rakuten, Kobo Books, and available on Apple Books. So I hope that if you are international, you will hop on Amazon UK, Australia, or Canada. And if you're in the States, again, you have it also is on Barnes & Noble Nook as well. And I would deeply appreciate if you enjoyed the book or if it was helpful to you, to please leave a review so that we can together help more NPEs.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Leeanne. I feel like I understand even more. This was such a great in-depth look at the book, so thank you.
Thank you, Alexis, for asking me to be on your podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks again for coming on the podcast, Leeanne. We'll be back next week with Season 2 of DNA Surprises. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please email dnasurprises@gmail.com. And if you haven't yet, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Until next time.